As I stand here today, there are candidates running for every level of office in America, for governor, Congress, Attorney General, Secretary of State, who won't commit, who will not commit to accepting the results of election that they're running in. This a path to chaos in America. And with those lines, our current president predicted the future. And he also said it's estimated that there are more than 300 election deniers on the ballot all across America this year. So he follows his futuristic prediction with one of irony. If people really deny an election, then why are they participating in it? That's the question that I would like to ask today.
It's a great question. If people wholly deny an election, you think that they would just start off by ignoring the system entirely and just going about their merry way. They would use other ways of coercion. They would
Yeah,
be using all sorts of, either by hoarding or being destructive, any sort of path.
I don't believe in the system, and that's why I use it.
There's something to be said too of like how these signals are being crossed everywhere between right and left, it would seem, because the left is fully blown. You'll hear it on every news network. It's on Bill Maher. Biden has, of course, been talking about it, how this is somehow the most important election that we've ever had, especially in our lifetime. So I find that odd. I also don't know if that means like in their lifetime. They obviously have lived many, many years all throughout the Cold War and stuff. And to say that this election in particular is the most important one, I find pretty fascinating because I think it shows in some ways, maybe not just their state of mind, but the message that they want to send out is very specific that the other side is I don't want to say treasonous, but that's what they want you to think. That's kind of what they're implying with their message.
Yes, and the quote is, in a typical year, we're often not faced with questions of whether the vote we cast will preserve democracy or put us at risk, but this year we are. So that's very clear. And then I guess I should follow up with perhaps one of my favorite quotes from President Biden's most recent speech, which is, we don't settle our differences in America with a riot, a mob, or a bullet, or a hammer. We settle them peaceably at the battle ballot box.
Oh, that's a direct quote, isn't it? That's from
That
the
is a
actual performance of the speech and not the transcript.
yes, that is a direct, verbatim, dictated quote. I listened to it many times, including at half speed to ensure proper replication. We
Oh boy.
settle, we settle peaceful. Sorry, I can't. I have to really try to. We
You have
settle
to,
them peaceably at the battle ballot box. It was even hard for me to do it.
you have
It's
to
like a
somehow dial into that, mindset of the corn pop. It's very difficult.
he's a master tongue twister. Instead of Sally selling seashells by the seashore, it's we settle them peaceably at the battle ballot box.
Yeah. Biden's dentures are probably going all over the place in his mouth right now too.
Gotta make sure those things are fixed in place.
Like our election process.
And it can't be that hard to restore faith and integrity into this system. And it doesn't come from further obfuscation, just attacking any side that would like verifiability, or to just have not just verbal reassurance, but verifiable reassurance. It can't possibly be that difficult.
It's really surprising for the party that promotes itself based off of having extreme amounts of empathy and being for the people cannot seem to possibly comprehend why there is failing trust in the system. And it's so obvious, I think, to anyone who's a normal socialized person in the United States how to build that trust back is that people need verification. It's the trust but verify. We've had our trust broken. They need verification. That's why you have these guys standing outside with their weapons at the ballot boxes and stuff like that. It's like they are scared. They don't know what's happening and they need some sort of assurance. But government can't seem to, or at least the parties don't seem to want to involve themselves in the healing of the nation. They are trying to like trying to exploit and use the opportunity from this division in order to meet political means, which I think is quite disgusting at this point in time. So it's strange that you have the Democrats calling this the most important election, and Republicans are like, well, it's just we're going to do our thing. We're going to make sure that everyone knows that we're all together in on this. So they've gone on the same talking notes. I do think that the message that the Republicans have been peddling for quite some time has been dangerous, or at least has the possibility to have a dangerous outcome. And I really wish they would stop doing this. The whole MAGA Republicanism sort of phenomenology has been, at first, it seemed like a unavoidable critique of the system, because I think that comes from the Democrats not listening to the working people they're supposed to represent. But this time it's kind of approaching in dangerous territory. So I think we could be reasonable and say that I don't think everyone in America is trying to get rid of democracy as a system. I think they have problems with the outcomes, not just because their side isn't winning, but because things aren't adding up.
Things are not adding up. Like when you have polling places that put up cardboard so you can't see in, and then they purposefully and forcefully exclude the Republicans in this case, who were legally allowed to have observers there, preventing them entry, preventing them from just occupying space when there were other party members from the other team there, when the video footage inside is highly questionable and there are very many a lot of strange things happening that no one has really been able to provide a convincing argument of that's definitive. If we can't explain these things, then we're not going to be able to trust people in the future. Like, and on the other side, I would not feel comfortable walking up to a ballot box when there are people with body armor and what appear to be automatic weapons watching me place something into a box.
Absolutely.
Even if they're legally allowed to do that, why not set up a camera? It's a public space, so people don't have the same expectation of privacy on public property as they do in private property. But why not like have a few guys with some cameras and like maybe an explainer and say like, hey, we're concerned citizens, and the reason that we're here is to just observe, or maybe like their other supporters are like a phone call away, or they're not in direct like line of sight walking distance. It just seems like it's like if I'm walking down the street and somebody is just armed to the teeth, yeah, they could be legally allowed to do that, but I also don't know if I'm 2 seconds away from taking 5 rounds through the body and the head. So it's like there's just tension that is created from that, especially when somebody's dressed very paramilitaristically. It would be like I'm allowed to have those thoughts because I don't know that person, and it doesn't matter if you are that person. You would never do that. Well, I don't know you. It's it's like I can't drive my car in a manner that somebody's in the bike lane. I am going head on with them. I leave the road, the marked road surface, and I'm going head on because I know that I'm going to pull right or pull left at the last moment to avoid them. Yeah, but they don't know that. It's like they could be 2 seconds away from being killed or quadriplegic for the rest of their life. So the pendulum does swing both ways, and unless we stabilize this bridge, it's gonna buck until it collapses.
Yes, absolutely. I think you said it very well there. We have this sort of like instinctual drive, which I think is healthy, to be skeptical about government and the systems that it employs, because you can't have a society in which you have millions upon millions of dollars leave each year the financial system due to unemployment fraud and tax fraud and government benefits fraud and all sorts of, title fraud. And this happens all the time. People are not caught right away. And somehow you're trying to sell me on the fact that ballots are 100% bulletproof just because it's illegal. Say all those other things I listed were illegal, and they happen. People get away with stuff. People get away with murder. It's this odd thing where you can't even like indulge in the baseline sorts of facts about the world.
And
This
when people,
refusal to even like engage in that level.
there are butterfly effects and compounding effects. For example, if somebody gets away with murder, it could just be a cold case, or someone else could go to prison. For that crime, there's plenty of cases where people have been exonerated 20, 30 years later after they've served a long time in prison, where something like DNA evidence exonerates them and says this person could not have done it, where the court will actually say this person is innocent, which they don't often do. That you can be exonerated and they don't have to say that you are actually innocent, but there are cases where they've gone out and said this person's not only exonerated, they literally could not have done this crime. And so there's just so many faces to what's happening. And
Life
this
is
is like,
so utterly complicated, and we don't have perfect verification. I think it's a very healthy thing to have. Obviously, it's problematic the other way too if no one can believe any outcome of any election. So there has to be some sort of balance found where we have, like, yeah, we will have people who are arrested who are innocent. But I don't think a lot of people would be in agreement that that means we shouldn't arrest anyone for murder then.
yeah, I agree with that. And this does
I
remind
know
me
you
of,
do. I'm not like saying that in any way that this goes against what you were saying, by the way. I just wanted to make that clear.
oh, okay. I am reminded of the scientific method where the reproducibility of experiments typically arrives at the same conclusion. And when it doesn't, then it warrants further inquiry. And they can say, why didn't we get the same results on this audit? It's like anytime you want to balance a checkbook or do some sort of audit of a bank account, there's a reason that you can go back and verify these records as many times as you want, and you should arrive at the same conclusion. You get a calculator and you add it up, it should always be the same. There's no reason to not be like to prevent people. Oh no, you can't reproduce this experiment, you can't retally these or inspect who voted, make sure that they were legally allowed to, make sure they didn't vote multiple times in multiple areas or in multiple states. There were just so many strangities. I'm not sure, I don't think that's a word, but weird things that were never explained. And because they weren't, then what are we supposed to think of that?
It kind of reminds me of, mathematically, I remember this problem that we did in Diffie Qs a while ago in college where, you have this cross section of a circle, more or less, like on an X and Y graph, and you're trying to figure out why these points make like a perfect spiral. And it's because if you don't include a Z axis, you don't realize that what you're dealing with is a cone. And so you have this extra dimension that you're dealing with that unless you have included that, you can get all sorts of random crazy results from just working within like a small framework that you've excluded all other possibilities from being involved in. And I think we've got to get away from not only trying to say, like, in some ways, we have to stop saying yes, but, and start saying yes, and, in order to like make sure that we're bringing in all of these viewpoints, and that way that the discussion altogether becomes greater than the sum of its individual parts. I
I
feel
like
like
it.
people
I
for
like
too long have been talked down to, and so we're not we're not getting anywhere because the people in the media feel like it is their job to essentially yell at the people that are underneath them, because they're too high and mighty to, deal with any of the possible criticisms that can come their way.
It is rather difficult to have like a normal conversation where you just want to dissect the merit and uh, really take down the points and inspect them instead of anytime somebody wants to look behind the curtain to just be called a xenophobic, racist, bigot, misogynistic, chauvinist. It's just that's just going to cause people to put their shield up and then the swords are out and you don't really get anywhere. It's just not very productive.
Yeah, every interaction becomes adversarial, and that's not a great way. I think, if like, especially if we want to heal the nation, which I don't think is the intent of either party at this point in time, but it has to be our intent as a society if we are to salvage the ship, which I think is easily salvageable. I don't think that we're past any points of no return, no matter what other people say. I think there's always going to be a time until the very last second before it is, unless we're at that point. I don't think you could necessarily predict the point of no return. I think that's definitely more of a backwards. Um, in some ways, it doesn't even exist. I think a point of no return is very much a subjective thing to claim, um, if there's no mathematical backing to it.
Despite every group of humans thinking that they are grandiose enough to witness the end of times.
Yeah, it's I mean, okay, so if we are increasing polarization on both sides, we have to figure out a way to reverse that process. And the only way to do so is by making concessions, is to sacrifice our pride in our own subjective sort of feeling of being right. Even if we are in some ways right on certain matters, there's got to be a way that we can get into, we have to like almost infiltrate each other's sides. And the higher value has to be we care about each other as individuals, but somehow we have lost the ability to talk to each other. And maybe that has to be the point that we start off at, is recognizing that simple fact.
Hey, and Joe Biden did say that America is not a zero-sum society where for you to succeed, someone else has to fail. A promise America is big enough for everyone to succeed. We believe we should leave no one behind because each one of us is a child of God and every person is sacred. If that's true, then every person's rights must be sacred as well. And that's why we believe that this abortion issue is being pushed so hard because every one of us is a child of God and is sacred. So if you're inconvenient, goodbye.
It's really weird because like that speech isn't necessarily bad. I think we would both agree that, like looking at the speech in the transcript, because listening to him is quite painful. The transcript of the speech is quite nice. It has those elements that we're looking for, that peace of mind that we want as a nation, to know that we are united against, um, well, I should just say that we are united.
It
The
was a
problem is that
very,
there's like shenanigans that are mixed in that I don't like.
yeah, it was a very well written piece of fiction. And if I weren't alive at all and had zero context, I would very much buy into it and believe it and just think this is one of the most authentic works from the chief citizen and commander of the most powerful and richest nation on the planet in history to date. But instead, I just felt like a lot of it was contrived and clearly read off of a teleprompter. Not that I
Oh
mean, like
yeah.
you're allowed to have a written speech as well, but in this case, I want to attack it because I've been trained to be violent.
Adversarial.
Adversarial. Yeah, nobody can have a normal conversation anymore. You just have to be like, you have to have like an extreme stance on everything. You're not allowed to not have an opinion. You have to just take some side on every issue, which there are more issues than time to digest all of them because life is short and we live in an exponential age of information.
It reminds
And
me
we
of
have,
that old Nietzsche quote, which was, I'm not angry that you lied to me. I'm angry that from now on I can't believe you. And I kind of feel like that's where I'm at with Democrats right now. Is that they've just spoken so much crap over the years that even though like I clearly fit on this side, at least from like a, you know, classical 90s perception of what a Democrat was in some ways, except for the economics. I think like my economics are clearly a little more libertarian leaning, but like on the social issues involving gay marriage and abortion and capital punishment, I like clearly fit in with this one side, and yet they can't seem but to want to constantly micromanage and steer the conversation into these like really idiotic pitfalls where like we're talking about it being the most important election of our lifetime because there are people who have questions about the election. I think that's really short-sighted when you consider that the whole like there's more to the problems that we're facing right now. People usually tend to vote in Republicans when the economy's bad because we need, some sort of like financial responsibility. And at least like even though neither side really provides that, one side is a little bit better on it usually than the other.
and in addition to that, they won't address, for as much as they accuse the other party of doing things, they also do those same things, but don't address it. So there's another quote that I had that says, there's an alarming rise in the number of our people in this country condoning political violence or simply remain silence because silence is complicity. Uh, so trying to explain away political violence, that makes me think of the fiery but mostly peaceful protests that kind of across America over the past few years. There have been like major cities that have been partially burned down, major institutions like courts being overtaken by angry citizens, people killed in the streets, and police and EMS told to stand down, autonomous zones set up within the United States that are not run by Native Americans, and just lawlessness and almost war in the streets. And they're trying to explain away that as it's just actually just not addressed at all. But then to say that the right is trying to explain away political violence, the left also is like a huge culprit of that. Or if they
Mm-hmm.
just have their own disinformation, if they when he was saying that an armed mob stormed the U.S. Capitol, I don't think anybody had a single weapon as far as the information I came across. I could be wrong on that, but maybe
I,
you could get
I only
into.
heard that one guy had one gun with him, but like didn't use it.
Oh, there was somebody that had a gun.
Yeah, but it was like a handgun. It wasn't like, yeah, I mean, like the whole perception of, I think I share too on this issue is that like from everything I saw on January 6th, that was one of those moments where I was just like, why the fuck is everyone lying about this shit? Like I could see with my own eyes what's like more or less what's happening here. And it's not because it's edited in any specific way. It's like clearly these people are, yeah, like they're misbehaving, and yeah, they should probably face some sort of like fine or something like that involving it. But like to try to make it as if they're some sort of like rebellious organized unit that has come for the United States and their leader is Donald Trump, I think it's just so fucking weird.
And it's fairly misleading to call, like, let's just assume that there was one handgun and that was it. Of maybe more people had things and they were just never discovered. Who's to say? We don't know. But based on this, if we assume this fact to be true, there's a single handgun in a crowd of, I don't know how many people were there. Let's say 30,000 people were there. And I apologize if that number is very off. But that's like a labeling misleading thing where you can have one ingredient that's natural and you can say made with natural ingredients. So I could have 99 artificial fake ingredients, but I can say made with natural ingredients because there's like one or two or three natural ingredients. So it seems weird to describe the whole because of a few specific points.
Right, right. And like that's I think the thing with people and everyone stresses like this magical idea of context. Like context is made up. It's like we only have a few, we have a certain amount of time to get a point across. And you construct a certain type of framework in which you want to kind of focus in on. But like largely context is there's a reality of what happened, and we only have so much information that we can derive from that thing, let's say, that's available at that time because of how many people either saw it or recorded it or have information on it. And then like you have to rebuild that context and conversation when you're talking to someone later on. And it becomes like a huge mess because, like I said before, we're kind of taking an adversarial approach instead of adding additional dimensions to the conversation that seem to be helpful. So now I do want to point out on the other side, I really do think Republicans need to take responsibility for how poorly they're also handling their side of things. Like it should be very easy to navigate these sorts of waters if you really understand what people are concerned about in the United States. And that's inflation. And for like Republicans to not constantly be kind of stressing how they can fix the situation and the remedies for it, um, they tend to be focusing more on social issues, which I think is okay given some of the particulars. However, I think Republicans should be calling out people that were like storming the Capitol of being like, okay, there's a right way to protest and there's a right way to be angry because we have to do things kind of towards like the idea is that you have procedure so that everyone is following the same thing. And when you signal that you're able to cooperate, that's when people want to cooperate with you. It's people who have had successful deals in the past, which makes them candidates for successful deals in the future. So they have a track record. They're able to
Seems
build trust in these things. So, like, Republicans are also doing a really poor job. Like, yeah, you've been talked down to. Yeah, you've been punished economically, unrightly. Become sophisticated. That is your job now. Your job isn't to act like a dumb child who doesn't know how to do anything. You might not know how to do anything, but the idea is actually to grow up, become mature enough to understand that if you are able to articulate your points correctly, you're able to organize correctly, you'll be able to win these things more often.
fair advice. Be better. Or I think there's some gamer tag, get good. GG. It's a good game, but you can also just do get good, get better. Yeah, I think both sides are very fractured, and it seems like, in my opinion only, that the far left is just like rabid, crazy psychopaths, and then the right is just a bunch of spineless paramecium. They're just weak, powerless, and they're too busy trying to get a kickback or get some action in an airport bathroom from people who are very much younger than them.
Yeah, I mean, like on top of all that too, and this message I don't think is necessarily passed on anymore. It used to exist in the 90s cartoons, and I bring that up because I think it is an interesting point because watching these shows, you realize that it's the bullied kids that end up being the villains later on. That's like an important thing to like fixate on because I think the far left in their antagonism is going to create a really dangerous far right because
Is the core
there will be a line that will be crossed, and then that's where shenanigans are going to escalate to terrible proportions.
I like that. And I was just thinking, how often is the class president or the high school quarterback the active shooter? Kind of a sad way to think about it, but there are people that get pushed, and in their mind they have reasons for doing things, and then we end up in really, really bad situations that were avoidable.
Absolutely. So now's the time for the right. I think in some ways in this culture war, they have arguments to be made that are legitimate. They need to learn these arguments and they need to learn how to implement them so they're articulated across to the generations because I figure that the generations are coming after us, we're millennials, and I fear that the Zoomers after us, they have looked like they've gone absolutely nuts. Some of these TikToks and stuff like that, I've just they're sort of at that level of I almost can't comprehend the absolute madness that they're dealing with right now. And I understand that like a lot of young people, their whole modus operandi is to make fun of the established thing, but that's another area where you can go too far, and it's we'll cross those lines, whether that's modifying your bodies in all sorts of different weird ways, or um, inciting some sort of violence. I think they've absorbed so much media too that like I don't think it's out of the question to say that or it's outside of the realm of possibility that a lot of people they'll watch movies, and because they watch so many movies and don't experience much else in life, like their life is they've experienced this thing that is watching a movie. And so when it comes to doing other things in life, they actually don't have that experience. They don't have experience with like dealing with people in a sort of adversarial way in the streets, because it's
I
mostly safe. So it's like the only time they've ever seen that is in a movie. So they will copy things they see in movies, which I'm sure has had some implication. I don't think it's like necessarily to blame, but I wouldn't say that it hasn't had any effect at all.
does seem like we've done a disservice to our youthful generation by creating safe spaces where there shouldn't necessarily be safe spaces. Physical safety, yes. Idea safety, that's probably debatable because we're preventing ourselves from having experience with conflict by controlling it to too high of a degree where, I mean, is this candidate really a great person to enter into our workforce when their resume is went to college in a safe space and learned how to swipe right and left a lot and learned how to scroll and watch a lot of 10-second video clips of people dancing and looking at a pig rooting around in the soil and then taking cues from farmers who didn't like their land torn up, who put a big piece of metal through their septum to prevent them from digging. And then somebody thought, you know what? I want one of those on my face because that's how I'm going to stick it to the system. Put a big ring hanging through my septum, which creates pain that prevents animals from digging in the dirt.
It's
It's kind of like
interesting.
self-flagellation almost.
Oh yeah, yeah, and young generations have always done that. The punk movement and all these sorts of goth cliques and whatever. But I think that in today's day and age, there seems to be like a dwindling amount of options for adventure in some ways because things have become so expensive. There's so much rules and regulations about kids being out at certain times, which isn't necessarily like
Don't
I
go to the
could I
beach. You're
could
going to get COVID.
oh yeah, yeah, all of this shit. Like you've been locked up and you're expecting kids not to go a little bit crazy. They've done this to the generations, and I think that's really quite a shame. They've normalized lying for the most part. Everyone's had not only adversarial um, relationships with people, but also they've kind of increased the amount of like transactional relationships we've had with each other. So like porn and oldie fans, and even you could say things like uh, dating apps are very transactional. That the amount of socialization that the younger generations have is dwindled because of the internet, and because that's seen as physically safe, that's seen as somehow being better than going out and getting your heart hurt, or getting into squabbles or whatever, which honestly seems like the better option now looking back. Hindsight's 2020 for sure, but having that perspective that living completely digitally online is not healthy. It's everyone's living in like a strange version of their own idealized world that's still completely bereft with pain because they're not actually going out and doing anything.
Wow. A lot of good points there. A lot of good points.
It all seems
And
to mesh together somehow, you know?
I really think a lot about those terrifying photos of like kids in band class, and they basically have a little personalized individual tent over them while they're playing their instrument. So you see a bunch of green aliens playing their instruments, or like all the masks that they have to wear a mask because on paper it says they have to wear a mask, but then they do a cutaway so they can breathe into their instrument and breathe through their nose, which is like you're wearing a mask on the surface covering of your skin, but not actually where the mask should be if you believe that it does anything. It would be like if I wore a condom by putting a condom on and then I cut off every portion that touched my genitalia and like taped it to the outside of my thighs or something. Like it's everywhere except where it needs to be. Like
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
that's the society we're living in now. We got people
yeah, we're
wearing meat packing gloves while they're driving their car with their windows up. I don't know what to say.
it is really bizarre. I think the whole idea of safe spaces has become it was such a short-sighted thing to begin with. Like there are beneficial forms of harm. And the short-sightedness comes from like, okay, so like let's take the overpopulation issue, for example, where it's like as a society, we need to stabilize. So we need to only have 2 kids per couple, you know, or whatever. So what happens is you actually get a dwindling society over time because people die from other causes. You know, they die before they reproduce. And if you institute a policy like that, you could see how that would actually have the opposite effect. It wouldn't stabilize the population, it would cause it to decline over time. Because you have some people who, you know, let's put in this particular example, they overproduce children, and then there are some people whose children do not make it to adulthood through normal things. They get hit by cars, you know, all this sorts of stuff. This weird sort of safe space obsession is an idealized form of the world we don't live in. We live in a world in which there is harm and there is death and there is all of this sort of tragedy that's around. And we should be learning how to deal with it, not trying to have this infantile fantasy that we can't be hurt.
So it almost sounds like it's based on the hubris of humans as a whole, that we think we're so great, we have it all figured out, we can formulaically describe everything, and therefore we also have the solutions. If only we could implement them through your complete submission and let us control your life and your finances and what you believe, what you post, because we just want you to be safe. We want you to be safe. Just relax your throat.
Yeah, and then it's like somehow you're again, it's the same party, right? The same party that wants safe spaces is also probably the one that's put us into more wars than any other. It's like, what the hell is going on, guys?
Yeah. Yeah, actually, and I have the good quote that I haven't mentioned yet, which was by at least it's cited online as coming from William Tecumseh Sherman. It is only those who have never fired a shot nor heard the shrieks and groans of the wounded who cry aloud for blood, more vengeance, more desolation. War is hell. War is not really something that we should be trying to get ourselves into. So if people want any sort of concession and peace talks, like what, even if you eventually say no to that, why would you say no to talks about it?
Yeah,
Which appears to
or
be what
in
we're
some ways,
doing.
just like even blatantly encouraging it.
Just yeah. Ugh. Enough people
It
have
is.
died through all wars in all of history that we as humans should collectively just say enough. There's no reason to die in war. Like, have we not learned our lesson? Apparently not.
Yeah, and like the next best thing would be to highly limit the amount that is like involvement is generated, you know, like having all of these strange, we talked about it before in a previous episode about the World War One sort of concerns about having all these different treaties, and then you're roping in a bunch of other nations that don't really necessarily need to be in. I'm fully against what's happening in Ukraine right now uh, with whatever. So yeah, Russia invaded or was provoked or whatever that exact information is that I will never probably get to, or even figure out if I can believe those sources or not. Even if I am told the truth, I don't even know if I would believe it necessarily because of, again, the track record of some of these actors. But having a complete and total like European alliance around Ukraine seems ridiculous unless I don't know, like maybe it's because I'm downplaying the amount that I think Russia's trying to expand. I don't think they're actually trying to expand into Europe past Ukraine. Beyond that, I can understand why they would be concerned, but I think there's also something to be said of like, how do we try to mitigate this damage and not try to overplay it? Like I heard, for example, again, something that I don't know if I can necessarily believe or not, but I heard, for example, that before Boris Johnson met with Zelensky, that Zelensky was going to entertain peace talks with Russia, which would have ended the violence, would have ended the war. So we're
I
at these
have
weird points in time where it's like everyone has like, man, they really just want to have this autistic sort of ganging up on something. They really just want to, they're just these weird maximizers. It's some sort of like fucking sickness that they possess.
I did hear the same thing, and I'm in the same boat as you. I don't know how I can ever be placed in a position where I would be able to verify that information. Anybody that's just we're just living in society, we have to make a judgment call based on, do we believe this information? And if so, how much do we believe it? Do we believe it 98%, 70%? Assigning likelihoods to how true something could be. And we're all supposed to take stances on it and give $500 million every 2 weeks, even though they're not in NATO, but they might as well be. And it's also weird that we can fund a war without actually declaring war, or without declaring. It's all a mess. I don't even know where. I can't find my words for that because it's such a messed up situation from both sides, from all sides.
It is because I think we also have to keep in mind that like even though right now I would say the provocateurs of this particular engagement is the Democrats, I think I do also have to keep in mind that it was the neocons in 2003 that got us into Iraq with the false information involving WMDs. And I feel like this sort of paradigm in which we've had both major parties in our country engage in the same type of shenanigans has really formed a type of like cynical relationship that I have with either of them. It's very difficult for me to believe them on anything that they're saying.
I agree. I agree. It's very hard for me to take anybody seriously because I know that maybe I don't know. I have a very high index of suspicion that I'm just being played. I'm being played as somebody who they want to get persuaded to believe in their side.
Yeah, yeah, and I feel like that's why I've come to the conclusion of like I'm still optimistic. I'm still optimistic. I don't think that this election is going to be the last one. But I think we still have to be slightly on guard. The best thing that we can do is whoever is the provocateurs of these different sort of conflicts on the different dimensions that we're working on, we have to figure out what's driving them. We have to figure out if there's a way that we can reach these people. All right. Like we can't constantly be throwing people away because they don't fit our idyllic model of a citizen. So these are people who live here. We have to work with what we have here. And these people, it depends. Like maybe they're incredibly lonely. Maybe they're having economic trouble. Maybe they're having all sorts of different stresses and pressures on their life that all of the politics and the news is just amplifying the stress and the, you know, degradation of their own sanity. And
That's
yeah,
that is a good point. Our own situations place us in a position of volatility for kind of like lashing out, maybe even if it's not well-directed anger, just because of other things that are going on in life. Like we've talked about in the previous podcast, how credit card debt is at an all-time high. The APRs, the interest rates that people are paying on their balances that they carry every month, are at a national average, I believe, of 18%. People are using payment plans to pay for the dinner that they're going out to get. They can't even maintain. They're behind, and just loading up the boat with debt. People got food, car payment, rent or mortgage, electric bills, cell phone bills for them, their spouse, their kids, anybody else they're taking care of in their extended family, cable bills, all their streaming services, gas if they drive to work, their daily expenses, the spontaneous expenses, the surprise expenses of like your car breaking down, or just like of society where, you know, people from work want to go out to lunch, and because we're social creatures, we want to go out to lunch, and then we end up, getting a $35 bill instead of paying $11 to eat at home. We have 100 food processors that have burned down. Thousands of cattle have died due to drought. You got 40 million birds that have been euthanized. Entire farms burning down under mysterious circumstances. People are selling their blood to pay the bills. Now, people have done this before, but there's even a higher number of people now than ever before that have been selling their blood. They have 2 jobs, but they're working part-time, so they don't have benefits, and they're trying to get an extra $150, $300 every couple of weeks. So they have resorted to selling their own organic material from inside their bodies to maintain their lifestyle or prevent a decline or to make ends meet. And for anybody in that position, I can understand why they would be upset, and it makes sense why some people would have a knee-jerk reaction, and they're angry and their situation is bad and we want it to be better. So, I believe in these people that we can make this all happen. We do have that fundamental belief in humanity, which is one of the reasons that we have this podcast, is cross-examine in order to improve for the betterment of all of us, even when there are many, many sides, and some of them we agree with more than others or disagree with more than others. We all try to wrap it back together at the end, come full circle, because as far as I know, we're the most advanced life form that has ever existed and will continue to be for the foreseeable future, at least with other life forms that we interact with. And so we are it. We are the hope of where life goes in the future. Like, we have zoos, we study microorganisms, we alter life on this planet, and we control most other life forms on this planet. We can terraform this planet. We can become a spacefaring extraplanetary or even multiplanetary species. So we can have hope and faith in humanity in order to collectively pool our brain power to do all these things. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so against war, is because we're destroying brains. And by pure empirical functionality, fewer brains is not to our advantage. We need that collective brain power, the most advanced, complicated computer that, to my knowledge, exists, which is the human brain. And then you create a supercomputer by synthesizing it all together in a crazy supercomputer computing farm.
Yeah, and it isn't even just about the utility of what these things that create, but like the fact that it creates love, it creates friendship, it creates relationships. That's what these brains do as well. That is where our heart is located when we're talking about it metaphorically. These are friends, these are people who are the culture. They are the carriers of the culture.
We define reality to some degree.
We are reality. We're not separated from it. I think we are living it. And we need to figure out a way to fight against the resentment, the cynicism.
Let's do it.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what we're doing.
That's true. Let's
uh,
continue doing it.
Hopefully, we'll get more too to join in. So, is it the most important election of our lifetimes? I would say probably not, because we don't know. Maybe down the road, there's going to be one that's even more impressive. But at this point in time, I will say that if we keep waiting every 2 years, every 4 years for one specific day where we give a shit, we're not going to solve this problem.
That's fair. We can make a small regional impact every day in our lives with how we treat others, the ideas that we propose to others, and how we have discussions, how we interact with people. You can vote with your wallet every day. You can vote with your feet for where you go, where you live, just who you hang out with. There are so many ways to make an impact.
Yeah, your criteria for friendship doesn't have to be that this person is the idealized form of a human being that shares all of my values and stuff. That's incredibly narcissistic. Find the people who help you grow as a person. Your ideas, let me just tell everyone in the audience right now, all of your ideas are probably shit. My ideas are shit. Everyone's ideas are shit. No one has a complete conception of what the world is. All right, eat that fucking humble pie and go make some friends.